He owned the airline, but when he boarded his own flight undercover, he witnessed something that stopped him cold. What happened next changed everything. The terminal buzzed with the usual pre-flight energy, passengers rushing, announcements echoing, the scent of fresh coffee mixing with the faint smell of jet fuel. Jonathan Hayes, CEO and founder of SkyLux Airlines, adjusted the brim of his cap and slung his backpack over one shoulder. To everyone else, he was just another traveler, a middle-aged man in a simple hoodie and jeans, boarding an economy-class seat on his airline. But today wasn't just another flight. Today, he was here to see the truth. For months, whispers had reached his office. Complaints about rude attendants, dismissive service, and unfair treatment. The numbers showed something was wrong. Customer satisfaction scores were slipping, and flight reviews were worse than ever. But data only told part of the story. He needed to see it himself. As he stepped onto the jet bridge, he glanced at the flight crew welcoming passengers. A young flight attendant with bright eyes and a warm smile greeted each traveler like they mattered. But just a few steps away, two others, a man and a woman, both in their late 30s, stood by the galley, whispering between fake smiles. Jonathan barely made it past them when he heard it. "Ugh, here we go again. Another flight full of clueless economy passengers. I swear, I can't deal with these people today," the female attendant muttered, her voice low but sharp. "Crammed in like cattle, whining about overhead space. They should be grateful we even let them fly." Jonathan felt a chill run down his spine. They had no idea who he was, no idea the man they were mocking was the one signing their paychecks. He kept walking, but his pulse quickened. He had expected to see a few lapses in service, maybe a rude glance or rushed attitude. But this? Open disrespect for passengers? This was a problem much bigger than bad customer service. Taking his seat near the back of the plane, Jonathan pulled his cap lower and leaned back. He wasn't here to expose himself. Not yet. He needed to see just how deep this problem ran, and just how bad it could get. The plane filled quickly, passengers squeezing past each other, stuffing bags into overhead compartments, and settling into their seats. Jonathan remained quiet, observing. He noticed how some attendants moved with care, helping elderly passengers and families, while others barely concealed their annoyance, rolling their eyes when someone asked for assistance or sighing when a bag had to be shifted. Then he spotted them again, the two flight attendants. Greg, the male attendant, tall with neatly slicked back hair, stood near the galley, arms crossed. His expression was unreadable, but his posture screamed disinterest. Amanda, the woman beside him, leaned in, smirking. "Look at 22B, she whispered, nodding toward a young mother struggling to calm her crying toddler. "I swear, people like her should just stay home. Who brings a screaming brat on a flight?" Jonathan's jaw tightened. "They always book economy too," Greg muttered. "You know they won't buy anything extra. Just gonna sit there, making a mess, expecting us to babysit for free." Amanda scoffed. "Bet she'll ask for extra snacks in like 5 minutes. Jonathan felt his grip tighten on the armrest. The disrespect, the lack of empathy. This wasn't just two employees venting. This was a toxic mindset that had been allowed to fester unchecked. The mother in 22B was visibly struggling, bouncing the baby gently, whispering soothing words, her face flushed with embarrassment. Passengers nearby exchanged awkward glances, some offering sympathetic smiles, others shifting uncomfortably. But no one offered help, especially not the attendants who should have. Jonathan watched as Amanda and Greg continued whispering, completely unaware that the man they were mocking passengers in front of was their boss. Then, something happened that made his stomach turn. The baby let out a louder wail, and Amanda snapped. She marched over, plastering on a fake smile, but lowering her voice just enough so only the mother and Jonathan, sitting just a row away, could hear. "Ma'am, you need to control your child. Other passengers paid for a peaceful flight." The mother, already stressed, looked up with wide, apologetic eyes. "I'm so sorry. He's just scared. It's his first flight." Amanda sighed dramatically. Well, maybe next time, consider a road trip. Jonathan clenched his jaw so tightly it ached. Greg, watching from the galley, chuckled under his breath. Classic, he muttered. These types always act like victims. Jonathan exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay composed. He had seen enough. More than enough. But just as he was about to speak, something unexpected happened. A different flight attendant, one Jonathan hadn't noticed before, stepped forward. A young woman with dark curls tucked into a bun, a name tag reading, Sophie. "Ma'am," she said gently, kneeling slightly to be at eye level with the mother. "Can I bring you a warm towel or some water? Sometimes that helps calm little ones." The mother looked stunned. "Oh, thank you. That would be wonderful." Sophie smiled warmly. "No problem at all. We're here to help." Jonathan saw Amanda's nostrils flare in irritation. Greg just rolled his eyes, muttering something under his breath before heading toward the first-class cabin. As Sophie returned with a warm towel, Amanda turned to her sharply. "You're wasting your time," she hissed under her breath. "We don't cater to pity parties." Jonathan had heard enough. This wasn't just bad service. This was disrespect, arrogance, and a total disregard for what this airline stood for. And it was happening right in front of him. He had walked onto this flight undercover to see the truth. Now, it was time for them to learn the truth about who he really was. Jonathan sat still, his fingers tapping lightly on the armrest. His blood simmered, but his expression remained neutral. He had built SkyLux Airlines on the promise of exceptional service, respect for every passenger, and professionalism at every level. And yet, 2 of his own employees had spat on that vision right in front of him. Greg and Amanda still had no idea who he was. They had no idea they were mocking passengers in front of the one man who could end their careers with a single call. He glanced toward Sophie, the only attendant who had actually done her job with kindness. She was now walking down the aisle, offering drinks with a genuine smile, while Greg and Amanda continued standing near the galley, doing nothing but whispering and smirking. Jonathan took a deep breath. He had seen bad employees before, but there was something particularly disgusting about the way these 2 spoke about passengers, as if they were beneath them. He wasn't going to let it slide, but instead of acting immediately, he pulled out his phone and typed a quick message. "I'm on flight 217. We have a problem. Meet me at the gate when we land." He hit send. The recipient? Michael, SkyLux's head of flight operations, and the man responsible for hiring and training every attendant in the fleet. Now, all he had to do was wait. The flight continued smoothly, for the passengers at least. Greg and Amanda stayed mostly out of sight, avoiding real work, while Sophie picked up their slack. Jonathan took note of everything. Every eye roll, every dismissive gesture, every moment of arrogance. Then, about halfway through the flight, Greg returned to the cabin. Jonathan noticed he wasn't alone. He was laughing with a well-dressed man sitting in first class. It didn't take long to figure out why. Greg leaned down toward the man's seat, his voice dripping with fake charm. "Mr. Reeves, let me know if you need anything at all. We take extra care of our top passengers." Jonathan's lips pressed into a thin line. So that's how it was. They ignored economy passengers, treated struggling mothers with disdain, but went out of their way to cater to wealthy travelers. It was a slap in the face to everything he had worked for. Then, as if this flight wasn't already bad enough, Greg did something that pushed Jonathan over the edge. Jonathan turned his head just in time to see Greg slide a bottle of premium champagne into Mr. Reeves's bag, clearly as a personal favor, something passengers were not supposed to receive for free. Greg stole from the airline. Jonathan inhaled sharply, forcing himself to remain calm. Now it wasn't just bad service. It was theft. And Greg had done it without a second thought, in plain view of passengers, while thinking no one important was watching. Jonathan's fingers curled into a fist. He had enough evidence. The moment this plane landed, Greg and Amanda's time at SkyLux Airlines was over, and they had no idea what was coming. The final announcement crackled over the speakers as the plane began its descent. Jonathan remained calm, but inside, He was counting the seconds until they landed. Greg and Amanda still carried themselves with an air of untouchable arrogance, completely unaware that their time was running out. Greg passed by Jonathan's row, still smirking as he leaned toward Amanda. "Finally, we're done with this flight. I swear, dealing with economy passengers makes me want to quit." Amanda chuckled. "Please, you'd never quit. Who else would sneak you free drinks in first class?" Jonathan memorized every word. The plane touched down smoothly, rolling along the tarmac toward the gate. Jonathan didn't move. He waited. He wanted to see their reactions when the storm hit. As soon as the fasten seatbelt sign switched off, Greg and Amanda relaxed, already thinking about ending another easy shift. Then the cockpit door opened, and Michael, the head of flight operations, stepped inside. Greg's smile froze. Amanda straightened slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. They weren't expecting management to be on the flight. Michael didn't waste time. His sharp eyes scanned the cabin until he locked onto Jonathan. Greg followed his gaze, and then, for the first time since boarding, he really looked at the man in 23A. His mouth parted slightly. Recognition dawned too late. Jonathan stood up slowly, removing his cap. Passengers were starting to gather their bags, but a few noticed the sudden shift in tension. Amanda, now clearly unsettled, whispered, "What's going on?" Michael spoke first. His voice was controlled, but firm. Greg Thompson and Amanda Brooks stepped forward. Greg's entire body stiffened. Sir?" Michael didn't break eye contact. "Now." Passengers had fully stopped moving now, watching. Greg and Amanda hesitated, then shuffled toward the front, their previous confidence shattered. Jonathan finally spoke. His tone was calm, but ice cold. "I walked onto this flight today to see how my employees treat passengers." He let the words sink in, watching them pale. "And what I saw was outright disgraceful." Amanda's breath hitched. Greg looked sick. Mocking passengers, ignoring service, and worst of all, Jonathan's eyes locked onto Greg, stealing from the airline. Greg's entire face drained of color. I didn't..." Jonathan pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. The recording played. "We don't cater to pity parties. These people should just stay home." "Here we go again. Another flight full of clueless economy passengers." The voices were unmistakable. A ripple of gasps spread through the cabin. Passengers exchanged shocked looks. A woman in the front row actually muttered, "Unbelievable." Amanda covered her mouth, stunned. Greg looked like he wanted to vanish. Jonathan's voice dropped to a deadly calm. "You didn't know who I was. You didn't know I was listening. But the way you treated these passengers?" He shook his head. "That's who you are. And I have no place for people like you in my airline." Michael stepped in. "Effective immediately, you're both terminated. You will not be working another flight for SkyLux Airlines." Greg physically swayed. "Sir, please." Jonathan didn't blink. "Save it. I've heard enough." Amanda looked to Michael, voice desperate. "Can't we?" "No," Michael cut her off. "We don't tolerate employees who insult passengers or steal from the company." Security was waiting at the gate. As Greg and Amanda were escorted off the plane, passengers clapped. Jonathan turned to Sophie, the only attendant who had actually cared. She looked nervous. "Sophie," he said, his tone finally softening. "You were the only one who treated passengers with respect today." Her brows lifted in surprise. "I was just doing my job, sir." Jonathan smiled slightly. "That's exactly why you're being promoted." Her eyes widened. "Wait, what?" Jonathan nodded. "You understand what this airline is supposed to stand for. I want more people like you leading this team." Michael nodded in agreement. "We'll begin your leadership training immediately." Sophie covered her mouth in shock. "Thank you, sir." Jonathan turned back to the passengers. "I want to personally apologize for what you witnessed today. This is not what SkyLux Airlines represents, and I promise you, things are changing." A few passengers nodded in approval. Sophie blinked back tears of gratitude. Jonathan walked off the plane knowing one thing for sure. Today wasn't just about exposing bad employees. It was about setting a new standard, one that started right now. Have you ever experienced terrible customer service? Tell us your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this.